The French Bourbons. Menhir, Bourbon. It ain't just a Bourbon from Kentucky. During the 17th and 18th centuries, this cadet branch of the royal family of France came to dominate France, Spain, Parma, Naples, and Sicily. And along the way they did a lot of cousin kissing and sister swapping. On a scale from 1 to Habsburgs, they're about an 8. They endured more than their fair share of inbreeding-induced infant death and insanity, but not nearly enough to have mandibular prognathism become officially known as the Habsburg jaw. Although when they did bring in new blood, it was usually a Habsburg bride. Across 2 episodes we'll descend the twisted limbs of the Bourbon family tree and encounter the ones that created history in Europe's former powerful dynasty. Today we'll encounter the French Bourbons. Their abuse of power cost them the crown and their heads in the Revolution, but France just couldn't resist and gave the family the reins of power 2 more times. The French Bourbons may be out of power now, but they're still kicking, suing for their lost chateau and telling protesters that the best thing the nation could do to cure its ills currently would be to bring back the monarchy. The Bourbon dynasty started with the marriage of Robert, Count of Clermont, in 1272. He was the 6th and youngest son of French King Louis IX, so he received very little. The prince was 23 and was hit on the head with a jousting tournament blow. He was crippled for the rest of his life. But his royal lineage gave him a noble bride, Beatrice of Burgundy. She was the sole survivor of the ruler of Bourbon in central France. The eldest of Robert and Beatrice's 6 children, Louis, cut a bargain with his royal cousin Charles IV, under which he was promoted to Duke of Bourbon. In 1328, the Capetian line ended with Charles IV's death without a son, and his cousin Philip's success of the House of Valois inherited the throne. The Valois continued for another 2 centuries. The Bourbon dynasty, a cadet branch of the Capet royal house, went about its business and ruled its piece of France for 9 generations, while their royal relatives ruled the nation. King Henry II got hit in the eye with a lance in 1559. Maybe those French monarchs ought to have avoided jousting. He died leaving 4 sons, and the Valois house was robust. But one by one, all 4 died childless. Meanwhile, France was in the midst of a Catholics versus Protestants, also known as Huguenots, bloody war. Seeking to create peace, Margaret of Valois, a Catholic and sister of Henry, was wed to Protestant Henry of Navarre in an attempt at making peace. Hundreds of influential Huguenots attended the celebration in Paris, but while they were enjoying their hangovers, the Catholics struck. Up to 30,000 Huguenots were killed in France. This was the most noted tragedy only in the struggle of tit-for-tat killings, which claimed thousands of lives on both sides. King Henry III was assassinated in 1589 by a mad friar. France was left with a succession crisis. One had to trace his closest male relative as far back as 9 generations to the Bourbon house. Its present heir, Henri Groom, in history's bloodiest wedding, succeeded the French throne. He was already King of Navarre, a minor kingdom on the French-Spanish border which he had inherited from his mother, but Henri was a Protestant, and the Catholic League would not accept that. He attempted to force his way into Paris by military power, but after 4 years of stalemate, he abandoned the effort and converted, saying, "Paris is well worth a mass." He signed the Edict of Nantes, which provided for freedom of religion, and brought the wars of religion to an end. Peace enabled Henri to root out corruption, expand the economy, and establish the first French colonies in the Americas. Following the honeymoon that started with violence by Henri and Margaret, their marriage did not fare much better. They had no children, and they were divorced. Henri wanted to marry his mistress Gabrielle d'Estrées, but she died from eclampsia in childbirth. He married instead a political bride, Marie de Medici, member of the wealthy and influential Florentine banking family. They did not like each other, but were able to have 6 children. He postponed her coronation for 10 years. When Henri finally granted permission for his queen to be crowned, the procession jammed traffic, and the royal carriage became lodged in the traffic jam. A Catholic assassin took advantage of the situation, jumped onto the king's carriage, and stabbed Henri to death. The throne passed to his 9-year-old son, Louis XIII. His regent mother, Marie de Medici, had messed up the country with her Italian favorites, and when Louis was 17 years old, he took power, expelled Mama, and ordered her loyalists killed. He was the king in the 3 Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas. The only one he trusted to manage the government was Cardinal Richelieu, who collected power in his name. Louis's union with Habsburg Anne of Austria was traumatic in its beginnings. They were teenagers who were compelled to consummate the marriage in front of the whole court. Following tradition, they shunned each other after that. Louis probably also had a preference for men. They remained childless for 23 years, but they became stranded together during a storm, and 9 months later, they produced a miracle heir. A spare, Philippe, was born 2 years later. King Louis died, possibly of tuberculosis, at the age of 41, leaving the throne to his 4-year-old son, Louis XIV. In 2 decades of growing up, he personally assumed control of France, and oh, what a reign it was. Louis redecorated his father's hunting lodge at Versailles with the most gaudy palace Europe had ever known, and to ingratiate royal favor, nobles had to appear in person to bow down before his majesty. Louis XIV was nicknamed the Sun King, since all light emanated from France and therefore from him. So Louis attracted all the mighty men of the country to bask in his glory, and he crushed the vestiges of feudalism. He also cancelled the Edict of Nantes, compelling Huguenots to convert or abandon their homes. Louis' majority of glory was derived from fighting wars throughout Europe, although millions perished. He solidified France's military strength. To put an end to a struggle with Spain, he married his first cousin, Maria Theresa. She bore him 6 children, although 4 died in early childhood. He also had many mistresses and illegitimate offspring. His most renowned, Madame de Montespan, held great power, but as her beauty waned, she was involved in the affair of the poisons, and she was exiled. When Queen Maria Theresa passed away, Louis married another mistress secretly, Madame de Maintenon. Louis' heir and son, Louis Grand Dauphin, died of smallpox at 49. His son, Louis Duke of Burgundy, and his wife and family got the measles. Anxious physicians bled the royals and gave them emetics, which really sped their decline. The prince, the princess, and their eldest son Louis Duke of Brittany, all perished, but a clever and desperate nurse concealed their youngest son from doctors, saving him. Louis XIV succumbed to gangrene at 76, after 72 years on the throne, remaining the longest reigning in history. His 5-year-old great-grandson was made Louis XV, with hardly any Bourbons remaining. A fertile royal bride was most important to find. A list of 99 suitable princesses was compiled, and Poland's Marie Leczinska was chosen. The 15-year-old groom consummated his wedding night 7 times with great enthusiasm on his wedding night. Marie was pregnant each year for a decade, yet 8 of the couple's 10 children were daughters. Louis XV proved to be an even greater lecher than his father. Madame de Pompadour, his chief mistress, was extremely influential and made allowances for her beau's harem of lesser mistresses. Upon her death, Louis became involved with a commoner courtesan, Madame de Berry. Louis inherited not only his passion for life from his great-grandfather but also his bloodlust. France was already swimming in war debt, and he dug the deficit deeper. His only son who survived, Louis Dauphin, contracted tuberculosis and passed away ahead of him. With so many similarities between Louis XIV and 15, no sweat if you get them mixed up. Louis XV passed away due to smallpox after reigning for 59 years, and left the throne to his grandson Louis XVI. He was unlike either of his 2 predecessors. Rather than pursuing the fairer sex, he enjoyed his ironic pastime of lockmaking. This even included his lovely Austrian bride Marie Antoinette. It took 7 years for the couple to consummate their union and bring forth children. Some have theorized that this was because Louis had phimosis, but bedroom ineptness is a more probable offender. Queen Marie occupied her lonely days with parties, gambling, and exquisite dresses, jewelry, and hairdos. She took most of the blame for France's ailing economy. She was originally unaware of the misery of the people, but she never did say, "Let them eat cake." Louis XVI tried weakly to put Enlightenment principles such as freedom of religion and the abolition of the death penalty into place, but it was too little too late. He followed the lavish foreign policy of his predecessors and deeper buried the commoners in debt. Some of the issue lay with the American Revolution. Louis shipped guns and ships to help colonists, or rather stick it to his arch-nemesis, the British. As a thank you, some settlements were named after the French king, such as Louisville in Bourbon County, Kentucky. Its largest town is Paris. Scotch-Irish settlers who came to the region over the course of the following century brought with them the technology to distill whiskey. They gave local spin by aging the strong drink in charred oak casks. This imparts to it a unique dark brown hue and full mellow taste. By the mid-1800s, the whiskey was transported throughout the nation in bottles with bourbon whiskey, or as it's often ordered on the rocks, bourbon written on them. Although some claim the drink earned its name from Bourbon Street in New Orleans, this hard-drinking boulevard in the center of the Louisiana Purchase was also so named in honor of the French royal family. So no matter which version you prefer, you can toast the House of Bourbon with a mint julep. By the 1780s, the French were not in the mood to toss beads at the royal family. They liked rocks and severed heads. Louis summoned a convention of the Estates General to deal with the country's difficulties. The three estates, the clergy, the nobles, and the common people, all had one vote, but the majority of the third estate were continually outvoted by the minority of the first and second. Bitterly enraged, the common people attacked the Bastille prison on July 14, 1789. They released the prisoners and took over the arsenal. Then a crowd of Parisian women, furious at the high cost of eggs, or I suppose bread, marched on Versailles to pillage the Queen's apartments. But the royals were huddled in the king's bedroom. The mob had cooled down enough by the time they were discovered not to kill them. Rather, they forced them to return to Paris, where they were imprisoned in the Tuileries Palace. The French monarchy was ended, and King Louis reduced to citizen Louis Capet and Marie Antoinette lost their heads. Royalists covertly saluted their son Louis Charles as King Louis XV, but he died in prison aged 10. His sister Marie Therese, alone of the royal children, survived the revolution. On the night before her 17th birthday, she was released. She eloped to her relatives and wedded her first cousin Louis Antoine, Duke of Angoulême. Meanwhile, in France, General Napoleon Bonaparte became powerful and proclaimed himself emperor in 1804. He mobilized the French forces and occupied vast parts of Europe. But in 1814 he was defeated by the rest of the European superpowers and banished to the island of Elba. Not wanting to go back to the days of gore of the Republic, France invited the Bourbon family back to reinstitute the monarchy. 21 years after the beheading of Louis XVI, his brother was crowned Louis XV. Napoleon escaped and recaptured France months later. The Bourbons ran again. Napoleon was defeated at the Battle of Waterloo, after 100 days and exiled to the island of St. Helena, from where he would never return. The Bourbon dynasty was reinstated for a second time, but not all were pleased to see the return of the monarchy. Prince Charles Ferdinand was stabbed to death at the Opera House. There were hardly any Bourbons remaining, and it seemed that if they could survive the ire of their nation, the dynasty would just quietly wither away. Charles's wife Marie Caroline found herself pregnant. Her son Henry was greeted as a miracle. Louis XV passed away in 1824, and his younger brother succeeded as King Charles X. Marie Therese's husband was then the heir to the throne. Charles would not negotiate with the middle and working class. He removed from office old revolutionaries and Napoleonic supporters. In July of 1830, riotous demonstrators poured through Paris in demonstrations against the king. Charles was compelled to sign papers of abdication. This left his son Louis Antoine as King Louis XVI and Marie Thérèse Queen of France. Their triumphant reign lasted for 20 minutes. Louis too was compelled to sign papers of abdication. Marie Thérèse pleaded with him to decline, but he was unable to. Under primogeniture, his 9-year-old nephew would have been King Henri Vive, but he was sent into exile along with the rest of the house. He wedded Marie Antoinette's grandniece, Archduchess Maria Theresa of Austria-Este, but they never had any children. Therefore, the elder branch of the House of Bourbon perished in 1883 with Henri. But the Bourbon family's rule over France had not yet come to an end. To see where the crown went next, we have to travel back 2 centuries to Louis XIII's second son, Philippe I, Duke of Orléans. During his childhood, his mother called him my little girl and allowed him to dress in feminine clothing. Feminizing the spare made him less of a threat to his big brother Louis XIV. But this might also have been Philippe's natural tendency, for he went on to attend balls and gowns and sleep with men and women for the remainder of his lifetime. Philippe married his first cousin, Princess Henrietta of England. They were miserable, and both took lovers. Occasionally they even slept with the same good-looking men. Henrietta gave birth to 8 children, and King Louis, her brother-in-law, was said to have fathered some of them. Henrietta suddenly died at age 26, possibly poisoned by Philippe's lover who was jealous of her. Not surprisingly, the prince found it difficult to find a second wife. Finally, German Princess Elizabeth Charlotte agreed to marry him. She told a friend that the prince had to hang a rosary around his private area, so he could perform in bed with her. The couple did not get along in spite of Philippe's practice of swiping her clothes. They had 3 children, and established the House of Bourbon-Orléans together. Philippe invested prudently, and ensured the riches of his lineage for generations. His 5 remaining children formed significant political marriages across Europe, and the majority of Catholic monarchs from then onward are traceable to him. The gay prince was therefore the grandfather of Europe. His sole remaining son, Philippe II, Duke of Orléans, had to marry his uncle's favorite illegitimate child, Françoise Marie. He was made a regent to his 5-year-old great-nephew, Louis XV, but he cared more about establishing his own position as successor than ruling, and his regency was disastrous. He was ousted and died at 49. His male-line successors, Louis Philippe I, Louis Philippe II, prudently avoided politics while their cousins messed up the country for them. They concentrated instead on increasing their vast fortune. The latter 2 dukes wed more Bourbon cousins, offspring of Louis XIV's illegitimate children by Madame de Montespan. Louis Philippe I was 7 years Louis XVI's senior. The princes were brought up together, but family rivalry brewed into enmity. The duke resented his cousin's throne, and the king consistently refused him political and military promotion. When the revolution erupted, Louis Philippe joined it. He shed his titles and adopted the name Philippe Égalité, or equality, and was the leading individual in supporting the elimination of royal power. Initially, he supported a constitutional monarchy, but when the king was tried, Philippe voted to behead his cousin. He also voted for sweeping decrees to condemn anyone who was suspected to be an enemy of liberty. Within 5 years, this was turned on him, and Philippe Égalité was made equally short to his cousin, when he too had his own date with Madame Guillotine. His son Louis Philippe made a name for himself as a commander of the revolutionary forces. He married his cousin Marie-Amélie Thérèse of House of Bourbon to Sicilies. He opposed the Republic's move to execute Louis XVI, so he abandoned the army and escaped to Switzerland. It was this act that damned his father. When the Bourbon monarchy was restored, Louis Philippe was recalled to the court of Louis VIII, who restored him as a lieutenant general. But centuries of accumulated resentment kept the cousins suspicious of one another. Louis Philippe was more liberal and popular with the common people. When the July Revolution compelled Charles VI to abdicate, he requested Louis Philippe to declare his grandson King Henry VI. He did not do so, and permitted the Chamber of Deputies to declare him king. Louis Philippe I was instead King of the French, and not King of France, which meant he was a constitutional monarch serving the people, and not the proprietor of the land. He regained peace with the European powers. Napoleon had estranged and caused the French occupation of Algeria, but he was not popular everywhere. In 1832, General Lamarck's death, that of a popular critic of the king, touched off riots in Paris. This is a major event of Les Miserables. During Louis Philippe's 18-year reign, industrialists and bankers increasingly dominated the nation. When the economy again turned sour for the populace, the king was held responsible. In 1848, a revolutionary wave known as the Springtime of the Peoples flowered all over Europe. In France, it witnessed King Louis Philippe overthrown and driven out to the United Kingdom. So many encores at last came to an end, as the curtain finally fell on the House of Bourbon once and for all. But the French still were not yet prepared to shut the door on monarchy completely. Napoleon's nephew, Napoleon III, the president who had been elected, proclaimed himself emperor in 1852. He lasted 18 years, but was ousted in 1870. France declared itself a republic once more, and this time it held fast. The Bourbons were out of power in France once and for all. But during Louis Philippe's reign he wed many of his 10 children into other royal houses. His descendants reigned in Mexico, Bulgaria, and Spain, and his 4 great-grandson Philippe is the present king of the Belgians. Sovereignty of the House of Bourbon-Orléans, and the right to the French throne still descends in the male line. Crown Prince Ferdinand Philippe was a dashing and well-loved military leader. His German bride, Helene of Mecklenburg-Schwerin, brought the Christmas tree into France. Ferdinand Philippe could have been a successful monarch, and even managed to beat back the 1848 revolution. But in 1842 he was thrown from his carriage and cracked his skull. He died at age 31. His son Prince Philippe, Count of Paris, was 10 when his family took flight. Following his cousin Henri's death, Royalists divided between acclaiming him as King Philippe VII and embracing his Spanish cousin, who would be introduced in the next show. Since Philippe didn't have a real nation to rule, he wandered the United States and served in the Union Army, where he certainly got to taste some of the bourbon whiskey which shared his family name. The prince proved himself in a number of battles and authored an admired work, The History of the Civil War in America. He married his first cousin, Marie Isabel d'Orléans, and they had 6 children, one of whom was Amélie, the final Queen of Portugal, and Philippe, who succeeded to the title Duke of Orléans, and claimant to the title Philippe VIII when his father died. After graduating from Sandhurst Military Academy, he lived life as a bon vivant playboy, covering Europe and America, fathering actresses, and staying away from his wife Archduchess Maria Dorothea of Austria. The Bourbons were forbidden in France, but Philippe could not care less. He was arrested in Paris and dumped across the border in Switzerland. In 1898, in Geneva, he was the victim of an anarchist assassin, but before the man could attack, Philippe altered his plans and departed the city in the early hours. The anarchist did not mind who the royal was that he attacked, so he killed Empress Elizabeth of Austria by stabbing her instead. Philippe spent the later years of his life on the water, yacht racing. He succumbed to pneumonia in 1926, aged 57. His right to the throne went to his uncle Jean III. Both his mother and his wife were Orléans family. The inbreeding was truly getting intense, and by now they should have been wiser, since he was prohibited from coming to France. He lived the rest of his life in Morocco as an amateur archaeologist. His son Henri loved France even though he was prohibited from it. He became a member of the French Foreign Legion, and was involved in World War II and the Algerian War. Due to his service, he was permitted to come back to his cherished homeland. He set about politicking the moment he arrived to regain the French monarchy and himself as King Henri VI. He did have some reasonable support, and even met with President Charles de Gaulle, but after selling most of the jewels, art, and property he had inherited in order to pursue his claim to the throne, nothing materialized. Henry married a cousin, Princess Isabel of Orléans-Braganza, and they had 11 children. She was also a descendant of King Louis Philippe. Henry was unable to afford the upkeep on his remaining historic properties, including Château d'Amboise, so in 1972 he granted them to a trust which opened the castles to tourists. When he passed away in 1999, his children plundered his mansion in search of traces of the family's former riches. Jewels, paintings, and medieval texts were sold at auction for only $14 million. Eldest son Henry fell in love with Duchess Marie-Thérèse of Württemberg at a ball in Munich. She was also a great-granddaughter of King Louis Philippe. Marie was infected with toxoplasmosis during her second and third pregnancies. Prenatal exposure made both Prince François and Princess Blanche developmentally disabled. They had a Paris villa to share with their 5 children, but in 1984 the couple divorced. Henry then promptly wed Chilean aristocrat Michaela Cousinho. He earned a living by writing, painting, and perfumery but lived way above his means, and was arrested in 2000 for owing $150,000 rent. His daughter Marie married a Liechtenstein prince, and sparked a tabloid controversy when she refused to have her father walk her down the aisle. Henry passed away in 2019, aged 85. His eldest son François had been Dauphin but died before his father by 2 years. He succumbed to a fall at 56. Second son Jean, Count of Paris, is the reigning head of the Bourbon-Orléans house and French pretender as Jean de Fourf. In 2009 he wedded Filomena de Tornosi-Steinhardt, a Spanish and Austrian noblewoman, in the first non-incestuous union of a Bourbon-Orléans heir in 5 generations. They have 6 kids, one of whom is Prince Gaston Dauphin of France, who was born in 2009 and will probably be the next in line for the French throne, as Gaston d'Ors. Eat your heart out, Belle. The family was staying in a luxury apartment within the Château d'Amboise rent-free, but in 2021, the foundation that Jean's grandfather created began charging him rent and threatening to evict him so they could turn the historic building into a luxury hotel. Jean is now suing the foundation. Recently, he has been identified with the Yellow Vests, who are rioting over the exorbitant cost of living. He alleges the French people are monarchists deep down who crave a nonpartisan monarch. He has stated that he would be willing to assume that position should the population wish to revive the French monarchy. Jean is not the sole heir to the extinct French monarchy. In the following video, we'll discover how other members of the Bourbon family inherited Spain, Luxembourg, and huge sections of Italy, and still hold two of those thrones. And we'll discover who else among today's Bourbons believe that they ought to be king of France. Have you considered sponsoring my channel, but didn't feel like joining Patreon? Well, now you can support me in creating more historic content and get the same rewards as my great patrons without visiting a third-party website. I am now presenting YouTube memberships. Simply tap the join button below my videos or the link in this post description. Channel members receive special advance access to all my multi-part series, beginning this week with a second installment of How Inbred Are the Bourbons, along with other benefits such as advance booking for my annual historic tour, merch discounts, and special loyalty badges and custom emojis. Become a History Tea Time channel member and spill the tea with me. Don't want to wait to know what's next? Members and supporters of this channel receive special early access to all of my multi-part series. If you want to support what I do, then please hit the join button or the link to Patreon in the description. Thanks for watching.